Hi, good morning, everybody. And thank you for taking some time to join with us today. I'm Joshua Baca. I'm the Vice President of the Plastics Division here at the American Chemistry Council. Again, thank you for taking some time this morning. We want to bring folks together to continue our efforts to educate key stakeholders and lawmakers and their staff about the unintended consequences that have been outlined and proposed in the Break Free from Plastics Pollution Act and the Clean Futures Act. But before we get into the meat of today's presentation, just a couple of quick housekeeping items. We will be recording the session today, the session of the speaker speaking. When we get into the Q&A, that portion will be paused for recording. For those who want to ask a question, the chat function is available in Zoom. We will be monitoring that and hope to take plenty of questions on your thoughts today. In regards to today's panel, the main speaker here is Martha Moore, who is our Senior Director of Economics and Policy Analysis at the American Chemistry Council. Her and her team have prepared the analysis, and we're going to kick it off and walk it through. So I think the most important thing that has been highly controversial and has really forced our advocacy on this issue are the permitting pause provisions found in the Break Free Act and also found in the Clean Future Act. And what does a pause mean? We really think of it as a pause on progress. You're stopping a pause on innovation. Our industry is working around the clock to build a more circular and sustainable economy. We have committed to address the issue of plastic waste. We have made ambitious commitments to ensure that 100% of our plastic packaging is reused, recycled, or recovered by 2040. We have made commercial scale investments to capture more plastic waste through advanced recycling. And we've outlined both policy views and a forward-looking roadmap to get on that path. But the pause provisions on the Break Free from Plastics Pollution Act and the Clean Future Act are really problematic. And they do force and would potentially cause widespread shutdowns of US plastic production. Many folks might think, well, maybe we pause making plastic bags or straws or plastic bottles, but that impact is far more catastrophic than that. The two fundamental chemistries and the building blocks for most of the industry come from propylene and ethylene. And those are specific provisions that are outlined in both pieces of legislation that would be put on hold. Those are critical building blocks to building a low carbon future, meaning the next generation of mobility and electric vehicles, lightweighting of those vehicles, making our homes more energy efficient, and a variety of other life-saving products in the medical field. And so we think today that a pause is definitely not the right way to go. To further bring that to life, we're going to start off with this short video, and then we'll turn it over to Martha to dive into the analysis.
Every day, America's plastic makers are making progress to improve our daily lives and build a more sustainable future. But what happens if there's a pause making products from plastic? The Break Free Act jeopardizes patients getting the treatment they need, leaving health and safety workers unprotected, preventing sustainable energy sources from getting produced, making it harder for small businesses to succeed, punishing families and devastating communities. The Break Free Act is more than a pause. It could stop the American economy and way of life. But if we let progress continue, innovation will thrive. We'll keep developing the things that are essential to our daily lives. And we'll offer a solid path for America to recover plastic waste. At a time forward is more. Don't pause progress. Not today, not tomorrow. Not now. Tell Congress to stop the Break Free Act from passing.
And with that, I want to hand it over to our special guest. Martha Moore has done some fantastic analysis and has some great insights to share today. And I'm going to turn it over to her to run over the economic impact overview analysis that her and her team have conducted. Martha, thank you so much for joining today.
Great, thanks so much, Joshua. Yeah, so as Joshua mentioned, the Break Free and the Clean Future Acts are really very misguided. They talk about a pause on plastics, but it really targets much more than that. He mentioned the ethylene and propylene that are specifically mentioned in the legislation. In addition to polyethylene, which has many fabulous uses, ethylene is a feedstock material that goes into all kinds of other things. It goes into detergents and adhesives and paints and fibers and antifreeze and things that aren't even in the plastic supply chain, and that production is at risk. Propylene is similarly used to produce polypropylene. Everybody's heard of that, but it's producing a portfolio of other products, including things like paint and inks, adhesives, wastewater treatment, super absorbent polymers that go in those baby diapers we saw in the video. Those are all derivatives of propylene, which are specifically targeted in this legislation. The pause, will curtail 100% of new capacity, and but it will also significantly impact production that's occurring at existing facilities, so currently online facilities. It affects several upstream and downstream chemistries, so there's a cascading impact. You're looking at just plastic resins and propylene and ethylene, which are named in the legislation. They also address advanced recycling, but that is sort of outside the scope of the analysis we did. Advanced recycling is potentially a huge, valuable industry with lots of potential economic impact, but we've not captured that here. That's an industry that's in its infancy right now, so we are just focusing on plastic resins, on ethylene, propylene, their derivative and upstream chemistries. So on the supply side, lower supplies of ethylene and propylene will reduce the production of organic intermediates and downstream products that I mentioned earlier. Some of the, an example of this is ethylene used in linear alpha olefins, which go into detergent products, and that would be at risk. On the demand side, though, if you're curbing plastic production, there's a lot of other chemistry and sort of complementary chemistry that goes into the production of plastic resins that would be impacted as well. So on the demand side, there will be lower demand for organic intermediate chemicals that go into plastic resins, some petrochemical products other than propylene and ethylene, and some inorganic chemicals. There's some inorganic chemistry that goes into plastic resins, and all of that production would be at risk. And to some degree, there are other supply chains. If you've got a facility that's, sort of dedicated to producing most of the material for the plastic resin supply, but also diverting some supply to these other end use products and other chemistries, that can be affected as well. On the complementary, and I mean that sort of in the economic sense, complementary chemistry are plastic additives. So this is a family of chemistries that go into plastics. They take raw resin, and then you add these plastic additives to impart certain physical properties, certain specifications, things like blowing agents and processing aids, UV absorbers that go into construction materials, colorants, things like that. All of that chemistry could be at risk. And finally, the plastic compounding section. So very few plastic products are made with raw resin. They usually are compounded with these plastic additives to give particular properties to the plastics before they are used in end-use components and products. And so that that chemistry is at risk as well. And so ACC's legal folks have conservatively estimated that between 10 and 20% of existing facilities would be unable to get their Title V permits each year because of the way the legislation is currently written. So all of these chemistries, the ones that are mentioned in the legislation, plus all of the downstream and upstream chemistries that are affected, all of those could be at risk going forward. Next slide, Joshua. So to evaluate kind of the range of potential economic impacts, we looked at two scenarios. The first scenario is a 10% per year pause, and another scenario looks at a 20% per year. We also evaluated two timeframes, a 3-year pause. So we're assuming this, for purpose of analysis, we're assuming this goes into effect next year. So a 3-year pause would end in 2024. A 5-year pause would end in 2026. So at the end of 5 years, in the scenario where there's 20% per year decline, we're talking about at the end of that 5-year period, 100% of that existing capacity would no longer be eligible to produce because they haven't been able to get their permits to operate. Next slide. So when economic activity is disrupted, or in economics jargon, we talk about it being shocked, there are several economic impacts. There are direct economic impacts. This is the output and jobs and payroll in the chemical and resin producing sector. Those jobs and the companies that are producing that, that's the direct impact, which is substantial. But then you look at the next level, which is the indirect. These are the supply chain economic activity that's tied to the impacts in the direct sector. So a firm producing chemicals and plastic resins makes purchases. They purchase raw materials, they purchase utilities, transportation services, spare parts, things like that. They also pay their workers. So it's this indirect segment are the suppliers to the chemical and resin producers. So if they go offline, then they're not going to be calling up their spare parts supplier and asking for more things. And finally, there's the payroll induced impact. So the workers in the direct and indirect segments are paid wages. They go home and they spend those wages in their local communities and beyond. They purchase services, maybe doctor visits or the car mechanic, home repair, tutors for the children. They also purchase goods, in the stores and restaurants. And so there's some economic activity associated with that household spending that's coming from the wages that are earned in the direct and indirect sector. So at the end of the day, you've got this total economic impact. After a 3-year pause, 326,000 jobs could be at risk. If that pause were extended to 5 years, it's over 500,000 jobs at risk. And this is just under a more conservative 10% per year capacity going down. So that's, by the end of that 5-year pause in 2026, half of the existing capacity goes down. Joshua, let's look at the next scenario. So here we're looking at pretty much the same time frame, 2 time frames, the 3 and 5 year pause. But if you take away 20% of the existing capacity per year, and here the economic impacts grow very substantially. At the end of a 5-year pause, you've got over 900,000 jobs at risk. 100,000 of those jobs are direct within the chemical and the plastic resin producing sector. Then when you add in the indirect and the payroll induced, you get into really very, very large numbers. They were large numbers before then. So, and significant amount of economic activity going offline as well. Let's go to the next one. So those are upstream impacts, right? So we looked at the impact of directly affecting the chemical and resin producers and sort of what their supply chain looks like, and those total economic impacts. There's also significant downstream impacts that we weren't able to qualify in this, or quantify rather, in this analysis. And these are the impacts on the downstream customers that are trying to source ever smaller supplies of domestically produced plastic resins and other chemistries. So the plastic products industry, NAICS 3261 for those that might be technical, produced $201 billion in output and employed nearly 600,000 people in 2019. But that's just really the tip of the iceberg. Plastic resins are consumed and plastic components are consumed in all kinds of manufacturing, building and construction, the mining sector even. Plastics are ubiquitous in our economy, and this would have a huge impact. Car parts, construction materials, furniture, medical supplies, and there's no carve-outs, right? There's no exemptions for particular uses of plastics in this legislation. So all of these businesses and end-use consumers that use these products are going to have to find another way to get the products that they need. If they're going to be importing plastic resin from overseas, that's an option. There's a lot of plastic resin capacity in the Middle East and China. Those firms would be more than happy to take US market share. Some firms using plastic components may have to outsource the entire supply chain. So not just the resin, but also the pieces that are being made, the components. Those would likely come from China or other businesses in Asia that have a huge ability to produce over there and bring into the United States. So, and finally, some of those specialty chemicals, adhesives, just throughout the supply chain, and all of these products, not only the plastic products, but some of the other downstream chemistries have, really critical needs or critical uses in the U.S. economy. Joshua mentioned several of them. You're not going to be able to build windmills or solar panels or PPE without these materials. So this is really huge impact on the downstream side that we haven't been able to quantify, but it's important nonetheless.